As we begin today, a couple things to keep in mind. First is that the next reflection paper is due on Thursday, so make sure to complete that. The second thing is that the study guide for the next exam, which is a week from Thursday, is available on Blackboard. And I said the reflection paper was due on Thursday. It's due on Friday. I'm sorry. It's due on Friday the 13th. I think we have Class April Fool's Day. But anyway, so Friday for the reflection paper. Next Thursday for the study guide, for the second exam. So make sure to take a look at that. Should be very similar in format, in types of questions as the first exam. So you should be in good shape, but if you have questions, by all means get in contact with me. And so it'll cover chapters 8 through chapter 16 is what the exam will cover. All right, so today we are in chapter 13. Picking up now kind of where we left off before the week-long break. And probably in one sense, at least parts of this chapter are one of the things about Revelation that a lot of people are interested in. A lot of people have heard about. Even if they haven't read Revelation, the idea of the beast and the mark of the beast and specifically the number of the beast's name, something that a lot of people have speculated about, if not been overly concerned about. And so we'll hopefully get to that point today, talk about that, talk about some of the options, and maybe even make a suggestion about what it might represent. So let's go ahead and start with a reading of chapter 13. And actually, if we really want to pick it up, we need to pick up with verse 18 of chapter 12, because that's where the paragraph break is, even though the chapters are somewhat different. And so if I could have somebody read chapter 12, verse 18 through, let's see, through verse 8 of chapter 13, and then somebody else 9 through 18 of chapter 13. Not everybody at once, please.
My translation has verse 18.
Does it have verse 18? What's it say from the beginning of verse 1?
Then I scared on the sand of the sea.
Okay, well that's verse 18. All right. So in that case, I'll be all using poor translation. So 1 through 9, and then somebody else 10 through 18.
Then I stood on the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rising out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his horns 10 crowns, and on his heads a blasphemous name. Now the beast which I saw was like a leopard. His feet were like the feet of a bear, and his mouth like the mouth of a lion. The dragon gave him his power, his throne, and great authority. And I saw one of his heads as if it had been mortally wounded, and on the deadly wound was healed. And all of the world marveled and followed the beast. So they worshipped the dragon, who gave authority to the beast, and they worshipped the beast, saying, "Who is like the beast? Who is able to make war with him?" And he was given a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and he was given authority to continue for 42 months. Then he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name, his tabernacle, and those who dwell in heaven. It was granted to him to make war with the saints and overcome them, and authority was given over every tribe, tongue, and nation. All who dwell on the earth will worship him, whose names have not been written in the book of life of the Lamb slain from the foundations of the world. If anyone has an ear, let him hear.
If anyone is destined for captivity, to captivity he goes. If anyone kills with the sword he must be killed. Here is the perseverance and the faith of the saints. Then I saw another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spoke as a dragon. He exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence, and he makes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast, whose fatal wound was healed. He performs great signs so that he even makes fire come down from out of heaven to the earth in the presence of men. And he deceives those who dwell on the earth because of the signs which it was given him to perform in the presence of the beast, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast, who had the wound of the sword and has come to life. And it was given to him to give breath to the image of the beast, for the image of the beast would even speak, and cause as many as do not worship the image of the beast to be killed. And he causes all, the small and the great, and the rich and the poor, and the free men and the slaves, to be given a mark on their right hand or on their forehead. And he provides that no one will be able to buy or to sell except the one who has the mark, either the name of the beast or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let him who is understanding calculate the number of the beast. For the number is that of a man, and his number is 666.
All right, so we have here at the beginning, and we've already kind of touched on it, by this question of, is there a mythical verse 18 or not? There's a little bit of a manuscript difference here over who is it that is standing. Because the translation that Matt read was, I stood. But if you have a different translation, NIV, maybe even, I'm not sure about this, but probably the ESV as well, it says, the dragon stood. Which, that's quite a difference between John and the dragon, because the dragon again represents the devil, Satan. So there's a difference between the devil and John. What appears to be the better reading is the dragon, or he actually is what it says, and he stood on the sea. And so it's most likely referring to the dragon kind of taking his stand. Now essentially if we were reading through this like it was meant to be read, where you would start at the beginning and go the whole way through, we would remember what we're talking about. But since we have this week break, we have to kind of refresh our memories back to chapter 12. Having been cast out of heaven, having failed to kill the woman, the dragon attempts to go after the children of the woman. And to do that, he brings up, or he gives authority to, two beasts. Right? So it comes on the heels of chapter 12, this dragon who is now furious because of his loss. And essentially what we have here is kind of a counterfeit trinity. Right? But instead of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, we have here the dragon and the first and second beast. And throughout chapter 13, quite a bit we'll see these imitations or parodies of characteristics of God or Jesus reflected in some of the things that the dragon or the beast do or how they look. The other thing to keep in mind as we really begin and get started here is that to really understand a lot of what's going on, you have to understand Daniel chapter 7. And so we need to go back to Daniel chapter 7 and take some time to go through that chapter, and then we'll come back to chapter 13 and see how this is related. I'll go ahead and read Daniel chapter 7, and we can talk about it a little bit, and then use that to found our grounding or ground our discussion of chapter 13. So this is Daniel chapter 7. In the first year of King Belshazzar of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions of his head as he lay in bed. Then he wrote down the dream. I, Daniel, saw in my vision by night the four winds of heaven stirring up the great sea. And four great beasts came up out of the sea, different from one another. The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. Then, as I watched, its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a human being, and a human mind was given to it. Another beast appeared, a second one, that looked like a bear. It was raised up on one side, had 3 tusks in its mouth among its teeth, and was told, Arise, devour many bodies. After this, as I watched, another appeared like a leopard. The beast had 4 wings of a bird on its back, and 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. After this, I saw in the visions by night a 4th beast, terrifying and dreadful and exceedingly strong. It had great iron teeth and was devouring, breaking in pieces, and stamping what was left with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that preceded it, and it had 10 horns. I was considering the horns when another horn appeared, a little one coming up from among them. To make room for it, 3 of the earlier horns were plucked up by the roots. There were eyes like human eyes in this horn, and a mouth speaking arrogantly. As I watched, thrones were set in place, and the Ancient of Days took his throne. His clothing was white as snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool. His throne was fiery flames, and its wheels were burning fire. A stream of fire issued and flowed out from his presence. 1,000,000 served him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood attending him. The court sat in judgment, and the books were opened. I watched them because of the noise of the arrogant words that the horn was speaking. And as I watched, the beast was put to death, and its body destroyed and given over to be burned with fire. As for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away, but their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. As I watched in the night visions, I saw one like a son of man coming with the clouds of heaven. And he came to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. To him was given dominion and glory and kingship, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that shall not pass away, and his kingship is one that shall never be destroyed. As for me, Daniel, my spirit was troubled within me, and the visions of my head terrified me. I approached one of the attendants to ask him the truth concerning all this. So he said that he would disclose to me the interpretation of the matter. As for these 4 great beasts, 4 kings shall arise out of the earth, but the holy ones of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever and ever. Then I desired to know the truth concerning the 4th beast, which was different from all the rest, exceedingly terrifying, with its teeth of iron and claws of bronze, and which devoured and broke in pieces, and stamped what was left with its feet. And concerning the 10 horns that were on its head, and concerning the other horn which came up, and to make room for it, which 3 of them fell out. The horn that had eyes and a mouth that spoke arrogantly, and that seemed greater than the others. As I looked, this horn made war with the holy ones, and was prevailing over them, till the Ancient of Days came. Then judgment was given for the holy ones of the Most High, and the time arrived when the holy ones gained possession of the kingdom. This is what he said. As for the 4th beast, there shall be a 4th kingdom on earth, that shall be different from all the other kingdoms. It shall devour the whole earth, and trample it down, and break it to pieces. As for the 10 horns, out of this kingdom 10 kings shall arise, and another shall arise after them. This one shall be different from the former ones, and shall put down 3 kings. He shall speak words against the Most High, shall wear out the holy ones of the Most High, and shall attempt to change the sacred seasons and the law. And they shall be given into his power for a time, 2 times, and half a time. Then the court shall sit in judgment, and his dominion shall be taken away, to be consumed and totally destroyed. The kingship and dominion, and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the holy ones of the Most High. Their kingdom shall be an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey them. Here the account ends. As for me, Daniel, my thoughts greatly terrified me, and my face turned pale, but I kept the matter in my mind. So Daniel sees this vision, and in this vision he sees 4 beasts. Each of these 4 beasts represents what? A kingdom, right? And so Daniel's kind of given a vision of 4 successive kingdoms that will take place on the earth. Each of them represented by what? One of these beasts, right? One that looks like a lion, one that looks like a bear, one that looks like a leopard, and then this 4th beast, which is too terrifying for Daniel to really give us too much of an account of. So these 4 beasts, or at least parts of them, show up in Daniel chapter 13. Or not Daniel, Revelation 13. There's only 12 chapters in Daniel to begin with, but right? Revelation 13, right? Because the beast has qualities of a leopard, qualities of a bear, qualities of a lion. So understanding that here's this vision that Daniel has about these kingdoms, and this last kingdom that's going to stand against God, against the servants of God, is very important as a background to what John is seeing here, right? And so the 2 are very parallel. And so it's important for us to kind of make that connection there to see what's going on in this passage. Because, as we read just a moment ago, back in Revelation 13, John sees a beast rising out of the sea. Right now, think about this, right? Put yourself there with John. It's almost as if you get that moment when the great sea monster slowly starts rising out of the sea, right? This is what John is seeing. The sea's starting to bubble and boil, and then here comes this horrible-looking beast. The beast has 7 heads and 10 horns. Exactly how that all works out, right? So some of the heads have more than one horn. And on his head, well, on the horns, I should say, are 10 diadems. Now, one of the things to immediately connect this beast with is that, obviously, kind of the dragon is the one calling it forth. But if you look back at chapter 12, particularly verse 3, the dragon has 7 heads and 10 horns. Although he only has 7 diadems or crowns as opposed to the beast having 10 crowns. And so there's a visual similarity here between the dragon and the beast. Right? So, if you didn't already understand that the beast isn't on the good side, and there's enough depiction here to tell you, right, this is the one that he's on the wrong side. The other thing to connect him with is chapter 17. Now, chapter 17 talks about a woman, a prostitute. But she sits on a scarlet beast who has 7 heads and 10 horns. But note what verse 9 says, or verse 9 and 10. This calls for a mind that has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman is seated. Also, they are 7 kings, of whom 5 have fallen, 1 is living, and the other has not yet come, and when he comes, he must remain only a little while. Now, I believe, and a lot of other commentators believe, I'm not the only one here, that these 2 beasts are the same. The first beast and the beast of Revelation chapter 17. I could understand somebody suggesting, no, they're 2 different beasts, but it just seems like there's so much similarity, right? The 7 heads, the 10 horns, and some of the other things that we'll see when we get to chapter 17, which suggests that the first beast and the beast of chapter 17 are the same, which means that these heads represent kings as well as hills, which will become important for identification later on. So 10 horns, 7 heads, 10 diadems, and on its heads also were blasphemous names. Now, what are these? I don't ask you that to tell me blasphemy, but by saying it's got blasphemous names on it, what's blasphemy? What's being suggested here by these names that are apparently on this beast's head?
Either offensive to God or directly claiming to be God.
Yeah, so the idea of blasphemy is it's offensive to God or it's claiming to be God, right? So there's this claim of deity that the beast is making. Furthermore, as we've already kind of mentioned, there is a similarity here in that the beast here is kind of a construction of at least 3 of the beasts that are mentioned in Daniel chapter 7, which makes it kind of this terrible, disgusting-looking beast, right? It's like a leopard, but it's got feet like a bear, and it's got a mouth like a lion, which stops you. It has 1 mouth with 7 heads, because it says a mouth like a lion, not like mouths like a lion. Right? Again, I don't think we're meant to be understanding this any sort of literally, but the mouth, of course, has to do with this speaking of blasphemous names, which we'll see more about that. Now, obviously, even futurists, right, some of those strict futurists that would say Revelation has a lot of literal things to it, would say this is symbolic of something else. That there's not going to be in the future this huge 7-headed beast, but instead that it probably symbolizes a ruler or rulers or world power. Right? And so that's one thing that seems to be a common idea is that there's something here related to those kingdoms of Daniel chapter 7, and that's related here to this beast. To reinforce whose side this beast is on, the dragon provides this beast with some authority, with some power. And so the beast gets its authority, gets its power from the dragon. So the power that this beast has is not in itself. But of course, even the power that the dragon has is only the power that God allows them. And so neither of these really have true power, but they do have some referred power that they're allowed to exercise. One of the things we again have to ask is this beast meant to symbolize a person or something impersonal? Some have suggested that what this refers to is a figure known as the Antichrist. And so a very common theme in a lot of apocalyptic literature is this future world ruler who will come forth, will kind of set himself up as God. And passages like 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, Mark chapter 13 are referred to suggest that we should be looking for someone who will have world domination in the future, kind of a one world ruler. But when we think about how the term Antichrist is used in Scripture, that's not exactly how John uses it. Let's flip over to 1 John. And if somebody read 1 John chapter 2, verse 18, somebody else get 2 John 7, please. 1 John 2:18. I'm pretty sure there is an 18th verse in John chapter 2. And somebody else get 2 John 7.
Children, it is the last hour, and as you've heard, the Antichrist is coming.
For many deceivers have gone out into the world. Those who do not acknowledge Jesus Christ as coming in the flesh. This is the deceiver and the Antichrist.
All right, Jordan, could you go back and read the other half?
Children, it is the last hour, and as you have heard, the Antichrist is coming. So now many Antichrists have come. Therefore, we know that it is the last hour.
All right, so the point I wanted to make had to do with come out of that second part of that verse. All right, so John suggests that there will be many Antichrists. All right, and now, again, what 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 has to do with this, hey, that's in Thessalonians, we're doing Revelation. But this idea of there will be a lot of people that will be these Antichrists. But from 2 John 7, what is the main message, or what's the main thing that makes these people Antichrists? All right, they're deceiving, but
They don't confess Jesus.
they don't confess what about Jesus? No. I mean, that he's come in the flesh. All right? And so these were people during John's time who suggested Jesus only seemed to be fleshly, only seemed to be human, that he was actually a spirit being. And so those people, John says, were Antichrist. So the way John uses it doesn't refer to this kind of one world ruler. So, it makes it a little bit difficult to suggest that that's necessarily what he's talking about in chapter 13. That's not necessarily a term he would have used. Additionally, if the beast of chapter 13 and chapter 17 are the same, it suggests that this is a conglomeration of kings. So more like an empire instead of a specific person. Right? And so to necessarily compare this to the Antichrist, it doesn't seem to fit for the first beast. Right? That seems more like it's an empire or worldwide power. So, disgusting looking beast. 7 heads, 10 horns, 10 crowns, made up of a leopard, a bear, a lion, working for the devil, blasphemous names on its head. But John draws us into one of its heads in particular. What's unique or different about one head of this beast? It was wounded. Right? It had a head that seemed to have received a death blow, is the way that the New Revised Standard puts it, but it had been healed. Now, perhaps here we have kind of another parody or imitation, because there is a way that this mortal wound that had been healed, or this appeared, what's the verse? Seemed to have received a death blow. That phrase could also be translated as slain unto death. And so what we might have here is kind of another parody or imitation, because we saw something else that appeared to be slain in Revelation, or slaughtered. The lamb. Right? And so the lamb, back in chapter 5, looking as if it had been slaughtered. And so here's this head that looks as if it has been slain or slaughtered. Right? And so again, kind of this parody. Perhaps even, later on it'll say it came from a sword. Might also be kind of a parody of Jesus' side wound, right? Because of the, he's hanging on the cross and they pierce his side. So maybe that might be another part of this. And also, of course, there's that kind of imitation resurrection. Right? It looked like he had been healed, or it looked like he had been dead, but healed. So what does this mean? Well, again, if we take chapter 17 to help us figure this out, and the heads are kings, one of these kings received a death blow, but it was healed. Right? And so that's kind of what's suggested by it. One of its heads looked like it received a death blow, but was healed. And this imitation resurrection brings about amazement in the whole earth, and causes the whole earth to follow the beast. Now here too we have to be careful about thinking about the whole earth here as the whole earth. Right? Because sometimes the whole earth was used just to refer to the known world of those people, and so the Roman Empire. But that isn't so much the point as it is this imitation resurrection causes people to unite themselves with the beast. And so it draws people to it. But not only are they drawn to the first beast, they are drawn to the dragon as well. So through the beast, they are really worshiping the dragon, even if they don't realize it, even if they're not doing it intentionally. And I think we've talked about before this idea about, when we were talking about the synagogue of Satan, there aren't really that many true Satan worshipers, right? People that actually would claim to be worshiping Satan. But, a lot of people will give honor to Satan through other types of things. Now, something similar is what John is describing. By connecting themselves to the first beast and placing the first beast as kind of this idol on their hearts, they are worshiping the dragon. And they are also worshiping that beast and say, who is like the beast and who can fight against it? And so again, this kind of idolatrous worship that we're seeing of the dragon, but also of the beast. And in saying something like, who is like the beast, we again have a odd echo of this imitation. In Exodus chapter 15, for example, verse 11, in the song that Moses sings, there is the phrase, who is like the Lord. And several times throughout the Old Testament, there are phrases, there are statements, right, that there is no one like the Lord. Right? There is no other God but God. And so maybe here we also kind of hear an echo of this in this claim of who is like the beast. Right? The beast has kind of become everything for these people. And furthermore, this idea of who can fight against it. Well, where does the beast get his power from? All right, ultimately God, but through the dragon. All right, so who can fight the beast is kind of like, well, who can fight the dragon? But we've already seen who can fight the dragon. All right, the forces of God. can fight the dragon. But still there is this idea that the dragon and the beast want to give the impression that they cannot be conquered. That they alone will be successful, there's nothing like them. Right? And so the idea is that these people have become wrapped up in this idea like the beast is all there is. The beast is the true power. Even though we know the dragon is the power behind the beast's throne. And so it's kind of focusing on this worldly kind of concept. We return then back again to this idea of blasphemy. The beast was given a mouth. Notice here there's a lot of passive voice throughout this. And the beast was given. It was allowed. And ultimately, of course, it reminds us that God is in control. The beast doesn't have any power in itself. And so through this now, it's uttering haughty and blasphemous words. Again, those words that are offensive to God, are offensive, or are claims of deity. Now here too, another interesting kind of parody. What animal is the beast's mouth like? It's like a lion. Right? So it's using that lion mouth to utter these blasphemies. Now we might think of the lion in sense of the roar or the nobility, but in the context of Revelation, what else might we think of when we hear lion? Lion of the tribe of Judah. And so, it sounds divine, perhaps, right? And so he uses this mouth to sound like he's divine. And so we have this kind of lion-lamb dichotomy because the second beast will have two horns, like a lamb. And we know the first beast and the second beast are very closely tied together. So we have this lion-lamb parody again. And it is allowed to exercise authority for 42 months. Where have we seen this 42 months before? Or what else can we convert 42 months to? 3.5 years. Do you remember where we've seen this before? Back in chapter 11. Chapter 11, the time of the trampling of the holy city, the temple's outer court, as well as the time of the witnesses, the two witnesses who are ministering in sackcloth. Is this the same time? Right? Is the 42 months here the same time as chapter 11? It doesn't have to be, but it seems quite likely. It makes sense that this would be another way of looking at chapter 11 because of what this 42 months will be. That it's exercising authority about blasphemy and then making war. And so the first beast blasphemes. He's speaking against. Particularly against God, against God's name, and against His dwelling, or those who dwell in heaven. And so again, these claims of power, these claims of divinity. Now the phrase translated in the New Revised Standard as His dwelling could also be understood as His tabernacle. And we're calling that original construction of Moses, where God met Moses in the most holy place, in the holy place, what becomes the forerunner to the temple. We should not see, however, against His dwelling and those who dwell in heaven as kind of two different things. As we'll see later on, His dwelling is with His people. We can talk about the indwelling of the Holy Spirit, we can talk about God dwelling in the church, but where God dwells is synonymous with the people who dwell. And so not only does the first beast speak against God, he speaks against God's people as well. He speaks against them, but is also allowed to make war against them. He makes war on the saints, but not only does he make war on the saints, he also is successful at doing it. Which again draws us back to the trampling of the holy city, the trampling of the outer courts. But also we have this conquering aspect. He'll make war on the saints and conquer them. The beast will appear to conquer for a time, but what are the readers of Revelation to think of when we hear about conquering? No, not so much. I wasn't thinking of so much of the horse guys. This idea of conquer or overcome. I've heard it 7 times. In 7 letters. Right? To each of the 7 letters of the churches in Asia, there's this reminder, to the one who conquers, to the one overcomes. Right? So it'll appear like the beast will conquer, but who's truly going to conquer? Right? The one who conquers according to those 7 letters. There's truly conquering versus the conquering that's done here. And so, again, allowed to make war probably for the same 42 months. And so we should include that, allowed to exercise authority for 42 months. And this conquering, this making war, is the same thing. But note, the beast is also given authority over every tribe and people and language and nation. The 5th of the 7 times that this shows up in Revelation, this phrase. It is rather expansive authority. This is a lot of authority that the beast has. But still, it is given authority. It's not inherent. The beast doesn't have this authority in itself. It is given to it. Now, because of this authority, and because of the blasphemy, and because of the power of the dragon, the inhabitants of the earth will worship the beast. Now, I believe we've talked about this before, but there's this contrast between those who inhabit the earth and those who are the tabernacle, those who dwell in heaven. Right? And so the saints versus the inhabitants of the earth dwellers. Here too we probably have another parody or imitation from Daniel chapter 7 in the Son of Man vision. And when the Son of Man appears before the Ancient of Days, the Son of Man's kingdom would be over all peoples, nations, and languages. But although it says all the inhabitants of the earth, it does not mean everybody that's alive, because there is an exception. Everyone whose name has not been written from the foundation of the world in the book of the life of the Lamb that was slaughtered. Right? And so those who are in the Lamb's book of life are not going to worship the beast, but those who aren't written in the Lamb's book of life are going to worship the beast. Now here's an interesting little side note that has nothing to do specifically with how John uses it. But what does this phrase, from the foundation of the world, modify? Now in the New Revised Standard, it appears that the foundation of the world modifies the writing. So it would be kind of a predestination type of concept, right? That there are names that were written from the foundation of the world in the book of life and Lamb. But if you look at something like the NIV, some other translations, foundation of the world modifies the slaughtering. Right? So everyone let's just say who's, not who has. everyone whose name has not been written in the book of life of the Lamb that was slaughtered from the foundation of the world. And do you see the difference? One is it was written from the foundation of the world. The other is the slaughtering the Lamb from the foundation of the world, which is a slightly different concept, suggesting God's plan was in place from the foundation of the world. We'll see this phrase again later, and we'll have a different look at it this way. But it appears that the Greek word order for this phrase favors slain from the foundation of the world. So even though the NRSV has it, other translations put it at the end, which seems to be more the Greek word order.
When you say the way you said it, when you said that the God's plan was in place by the way you said it, would that go along with before the foundation of the world, I knew you?
I think you're conflating two passages. I think you're the Jeremiah passage before you were in the womb, I knew you.
Right.
Yeah, but I mean there are other passages, and one we'll see later in Revelation, that have this idea about individuals from the foundation of the world. And so we'll look at that one. But what I'm saying here is that the phrase probably should be that the Lamb was slaughtered from the foundation of the world. And so thinking about that, the Genesis 3 passage, 3:15, that talks about the seed of the woman would bruise the seed of the serpent's head. God already has His plan in place, so it's as if Jesus was executed, crucified at the foundation of the world. And so that's what it seems to be the case, even though some translations move it around. Where if it were this way, it would be God wrote everybody's name in the book that would be saved, and then the world started. There might be some other passages that suggest that, but this is not, I don't think, meant to be one of them. And we can talk about maybe some of those other passages when we get to later on in Revelation. So the idea here is that names that were written in the book of life of the Lamb that was slain from the foundation of the world, those people won't worship the beast, but everyone else will. And if we didn't think if we didn't already think there was something significant going on, John tells us, let anyone who has an ear listen. Now this too comes from the letters to the 7 churches. But in those letters it says, listen to what the Spirit has to say to the churches. But essentially the idea here is something important is being revealed if you were only able to recognize it. If you were paying attention. Right? If you're in the know, or kind of you know what I'm talking about. Right? There's this kind of, there's something going on here that you need to pay attention. If your ears are tuned in, you'll know what's going on. Now also, there's kind of here implicitly, not only just know, but obey. If you know what I'm talking about, you're going to do the right thing. Because the temptation here that we've continued to look at is this idea of the people that are accommodating, compromising. And so John's trying to encourage them, listen to what I'm telling you about this beast, and then do the right thing. Right? Don't fall into his trap. Don't follow what the rest of the people are going to do. Then he says, if you are to be taken captive, into captivity you go. If you kill with the sword you must be killed. Who's he talking to? Is this a warning that there's suffering coming for Christians? If you're to be taken captive, into captivity you're going to go? This kind of sounds a little bit like what something Jesus says in the Garden of Gethsemane. And when the temple police come out to arrest him, Peter pulls out his sword, cuts off the high priest's servant's ear, And Jesus says, all who take the sword will perish by the sword. And so is there a warning here for Christians that there's suffering coming and you need to respond accordingly? Is it a warning to the persecutor for what's coming? Right? What's coming is captivity and death because you've persecuted my people. Which do you think it is? Who's this talking to? Is it talking to the beast and the worshipers of the beast, or is this a warning for the Christians hearing or reading Revelation?
I think they're talking about the Christians being taken captive.
Okay.
And just a warning to the ones who killed the sword. If you look at that, so I guess that could be too.
Yeah, and you can see how Christians might be tempted to respond to this persecution with violence. And so, hey, if you're going to use violence, you're going to reap the consequences of that. It's one of each, right? One for the persecuted and one for the persecutor. I don't know exactly. Because either way, we could understand these passages or these phrases going either way. Right? There is destruction coming for the beast, but there is suffering coming for the Christians as well.
Could you read your version of verse 10 again?
Verse 10. If you are to be taken captive, into captivity you go. If you kill with the sword you must be killed.
My verse, the second part says, if anyone is to be slain with the sword he must be slain.
Yeah.
That seems to be a pretty big difference.
Yeah, that's true. And I think part of what's going on here is that there are some verbs and some words missing from the Greek that are having to be supplied by the translators.
Okay.
Which is why you end up having this active versus passive.
Because I can see where yours says something separate to different people, or possibly even a warning, but mine just seems to be like, this is how it's going to be, making the most of it.
Yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't thought about that. I missed that when I was looking.
And I think I got the same version he has, because at the end of verse 10 it says, here's a call for the endurance and faith of his faith.
Yeah, and we're going to get to that phrase here in a minute. Yeah, that's one of the things. Either way, whether this is for the persecuted or the persecutor, or one for each, or some sort of other types of thing, it's a call for the faithful. Don't fall for the schemes of the dragon. And so, no matter what happens, don't get caught up in all of that. Don't respond that way. Right? And so, what is being encouraged here that's clear is endure. Keep the faith. What questions or comments or other things related to this about the first beast? All right, let's move on into the second beast. And so John here is watching all of this happen. It's the first beast rising out of the sea. And a second beast now rising from the earth. Now, the second beast is often in later chapters referred to as the false prophet. And so John will say false prophet, but he's referring to this second beast. Largely referring to it as a false prophet because of the activity of this second beast, which we'll talk about here in a minute. But why the difference between sea and earth? The first beast comes up out of the sea. The second beast comes out of the earth. Now, thinking back to Daniel chapter 7, the four beasts, right, the lion, the bear, the leopard, and that fourth beast, they come out of the sea. But when Daniel is told what they are, it's talking about kings rising from the earth. even though we've just seen them come out of the sea. Right? So maybe it's because of Daniel serving as the foundation for here. Some have suggested that the sea refers to the Gentiles and the land refers to the Jews because of the land promise given to Abraham. Now, often the people that say this will also say that it's related to this Antichrist figure, so that there will be a Gentile Antichrist and a Jewish Antichrist. But again, that terminology we've already talked about. It might just mean that the dragon is going to use whatever he can. It might also be kind of a parody of that angel from chapter 10, that mighty angel that had a foot on the land and a foot on the sea. So, how far we actually should press this as to say, is there something significant here? I don't know. I think it might just mean to suggest that the expansive authority of the dragon, the expansive authority of these beasts. But what does come into clearer understanding is when we start taking this second beast apart and looking at its components. It has two horns like a lamb, but speaks like a dragon. Now, by saying it has two horns like a lamb, but speaks like a dragon, what's that communicating? All right, wolves in sheep's clothing, right? Which is connected with the false prophets, and John calls this a false prophet. What else might be a way to kind of come?
It looks good and it sounds good.
Right? It looks good, sounds good, but where's the sounding coming from? Right? It's coming from the dragon. Right? So horns like a lamb, right? The sheep's clothing, right? Looks like Jesus, or it looks like Christ, or something salvific. Yeah, but inside, or what comes out, right, is a dragon. And if we think about Jesus' warning about false prophets, about by their fruits you will know them. Right? And so it looks like a lamb, but when it speaks like a dragon. And so it looks like Christ, but sounds like Satan, is essentially kind of the idea. And of course, Jesus warned not only that false prophets would arise, but false Christs would arise, right? People claiming to be the Messiah. And of course, calling this beast the false prophet means that, the purpose of this second beast is to direct people to the first beast. Specifically to make them worship the first beast. But here too, we also see kind of this additional handing on of power. Right? The dragon gave the first beast its power. The first beast gives the second beast its power. And so it's empowered by this first beast. Has the similar type of authority that the first beast does. But it's something distinct, right? It's a second beast. The main job, the main mission of this second beast is to make the inhabitants of the earth, right, those earth dwellers, worship the first beast. And that's the purpose of what this second beast is for. But note, here again, John reminds us that one of those heads of that first beast had a mortal wound that was healed. And so that kind of seems to be the focal point that the second beast uses to encourage the worship. So now think about this. If the first beast is an empire, conglomeration of kings, comparing it with chapter 17, then the second beast encourages the worship of that empire, specifically the empire's heads or kings. Right? That mortal wound of that head that had been healed. And so kind of this divination of the first beast. The way that it goes about convincing people to worship the first beast is through performing great signs, like calling fire down from heaven. So much so that it deceives the inhabitants of the earth. So there's deception here as well. using counterfeit miracles to fool the world. Now, does this mean that the second beast will actually do miracles? Jesus seemed to indicate in some of his teaching that there was a possibility of things, or at least things that would look like miracles that would be deceptive. Things done in his name, apparently deceiving, and perhaps even deceiving some Christians who did not take his warning. And so the idea of signs and wonders being done by these false or evil forces is not out of the question. But they're ultimately deceptive in nature. So once the second beast has deceived these people about the first beast through these signs, what does he call upon the people to do? Yeah, make an image, right? Or an idol, essentially. And so the encouragement is to set up an image for the beast. And again, we're reminded that this beast is wounded by the sword, but has been healed, right? So we're really coming up against this repetition of all of these things. The second beast is allowed, notice that possessive, is allowed to give breath to the image of the beast, right, these idols, so that the images will be able to speak. And additionally, he's allowed to cause those who would not worship the image of the beast to be killed. Now, on the surface, that sounds kind of freaky. These talking idols, right? These talking statues. Is that what it's talking about? Well, there were cases in antiquity of priests using ventriloquism, using mechanical setups to make statues and other types of things speak. So false, it's deceptive. So that wouldn't necessarily be out of the question about what's being referred here to. But let's look at this a little bit differently. What is it that causes these images to speak? Right? It's the breath. It gives breath to the image. Now, when you think of something giving breath to something else in the Bible, what kind of things do you think of? God giving breath to Adam, right? He forms Adam out of the dust and then breathes into him the breath of life. And even in Revelation, right, the breath of life entered the two witnesses after they had died. So probably it's not so much about trickery that might have been used by Roman priests or antiquity priests, as much as it is about another parody, another imitation of trying to do something that God does. And ultimately, of course, the part of this that is especially impactful is that those that do not worship the image of the beast are to be killed. And additionally, the second beast also causes, now notice, all, and if you thought somebody was missing from all, it's reiterated, small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, right? Have we covered everybody? Yes, everybody. And so there's this kind of universal program that the second beast will undertake, and it will affect the important and the unimportant. But specifically, the program is to have people marked. Where are they to be marked? All right, so on the right hand and their forehead. Now we've been talking a lot about parody, we've been talking a lot about imitation, we've been talking about like these cheap knockoffs of the dragon and the two beasts. Do this one yourself, right? Marking on the forehead. What's this an imitation of? Sealing of the, yeah, specifically the number 144,000. All right. So again, all these kind of things are cheap imitations of what God does, and so kind of trying to have this power that truly isn't there. All right. Causes all, small and great, rich and poor, free and slave to be marked. On the right hand, right hand, right side, important in antiquity, versus the left side, being left-handed. I don't particularly like that. As well as the word sinister connected with the word for left-handed. But the right hand, the forehead, we can think about, the parody here of the seal. Of course, God told the Israelites to bind the law on their forehead, that kind of connection with the mind, right? And so you have the mind and your activity maybe, right, the hand. And so this kind of trying to take over the possession or ownership of these people. What questions do you have about the second beast? All right, so that gets us through verse 16, and there's nothing important in those last two verses, nothing confusing at all, so we can just kind of skip over them. Oh, we got time. I guess we ought to talk about it. All right, mark of the beast. So this program of marking people, and the consequences being that if you don't have the mark, you can't buy or sell. All right, so there's an economic consequence of not having the mark. There have been a wide variety of theories about what this mark is. And obviously, of course, it's different depending upon whether you're a preterist, a futurist, idealist, historicist. And so there have been theories for futurists at different times in history, like when barcodes were instituted. Right? To buy or sell, you have to have a barcode, mark of the beast. Right? Probably not. Some people have suggested as well that someday you will have a computer chip implanted in your right hand that will connect with your bank account. That's, these kind of things are actually getting close, and so sometimes you go, whoa, Yeah. Yes. I don't think that's what it's talking about, but it is one of those times where you go, that's kind of creepy. But other types of things like that have been suggested to refer to this. Now, a couple things here. It would have to make sense to them first. The original people that receive this. Barcodes are not going to make sense. Right? Computer chips implanted in your skin is not going to be making sense. Debit cards was another thing, or debit and credit cards. And so a lot of these things that we think of in our contemporary period, which have some resonance sometimes, right, we've got to be careful because it wouldn't necessarily have been something they understood. But John's telling it in such a way that it's something that they can understand. Yeah, something. Yeah, something that would have marked you, identified you. But one of the things to think about is that, especially if we're taking it in the context of the Roman Empire, there doesn't appear to have been, at least in John's time, any sort of empire-wide sanctions like this. And so maybe there was something local. But when we come to the 3rd century, there's something interesting known as the libellus. During the reign of the Emperor Decius, Decius was he ends up being a persecutor of Christians. Doesn't seem like he was extremely cruel, but he was focused on Rome's glory and felt that Rome had declined in glory because people had turned away from the gods. Some of them to become Christians, some of them just turning away from the gods. And so he enlists a persecution, especially on Christians, looking for people to apostatize from the church. He doesn't want martyrs, because martyrs just adds to causes. So he's wanting people to apostatize. And so he required people to sacrifice. And in their sacrifices, they would have to sacrifice to the emperor. And I'm missing the page that had my libellus on it. If they sacrificed, then they would receive a piece of paper known as a libellus that essentially stated, this person on this date sacrificed. I could read you one, but this word even been found, but I've lost my page. I must have left it in my office. But we found these kind of things. And so maybe it's something like this. Maybe not specifically the libellus. That seems to be kind of too late for what John's talking about. But still this kind of outward pressure. Maybe from the trade guilds. Right? We talked about the trade guilds in a lot of these cities being, held in temples and those kind of things. So there's that economic pressure of, if you're not participating in the trade guilds and these worship settings, you're going to be cut out. You're not going to be able to participate in this. But the other thing to note is that this mark is specifically related to the name of the beast. And not only that, the number of its name. I might add my sheet in there, but so there's something here related to the identification of the beast that is part here. Additionally, John says that understanding this mark and the name of the beast requires wisdom. It's not outright obvious, but it's calling upon people to wisely understand what's going on here. Note what else it says. Let anyone with understanding calculate the number of the beast. And he goes on to say it is the number of a person or the number of a man, depending on your translation. Now, some people have suggested that what is talked about here is that we understand it not so much as a person or a man, but simply man or humanity, right? And so the 666 would be contrasted to, let's say, the number for God, which would be 777, in the sense of, we think of 7 as perfection, we connect it with holy, 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 and so to say it 3 times emphasizes it, and so God is 777, and human beings are 666, right? Imperfection. And so some people have suggested that. And there's some early Christian writings that talk about the number for Jesus being 888. So where does that come from? Well, it comes from a couple of things we'll talk about here as well, but also what was emphasized was the 8th day. So, well, there's only 7 days in a week. Yes, but the 7th day was the Sabbath, and then with Jesus being resurrected on that first day after the Sabbath, people started talking about the 8th day, right? So that kind of new first day of the week. So maybe it's talking about contrasting humanity to God. But ultimately, that number is 666. And so, of course, this number 666 has plagued people's imaginations. And I think we've talked about this before, about, hearing of people, adding to their checkout total because they, like, let me get a pack of gum because I don't want my total to be 666, or I don't want my change to be 666, right? And it's not talking about your change. It's not talking about what you pump at the gas station. It's not talking about, have you ever sung 666 in the songbook at church? Right? Nobody ever touches that, right? Does anybody have a footnote on that number?
Mine says one early manuscript reads 616.
Yeah, there's an early manuscript, and there's probably more than that actually. It's not many. They say 616, which makes you go, what if it's 616, not 666? Right? Have we all been so traumatized by this number, and it's not even the right number? But this is the number that everybody fixates on. So what is 666? Well, if you look at all the interpretations, and I didn't come up with this three general. I kind of had some of these ideas, but this was nicely laid out in commentary to kind of conceptualize it in this way. There are three general interpretations. Now, certainly there are variations within each of these, but three overarching interpretations. So some people say that it has to do with chronology. So 666 has to do with like the length of time the beast will reign. And so that's what 666 refers to. And so people used it to talk about Islam. They've used it to talk about Nazi Germany. And so again, there's been variations within it, but generally some people say it has to do with chronology. Other people say it's more of a symbolic number, like the 777888, where it is not meant to refer to a specific person, but to a power, or maybe even the Antichrist himself, for those that believe that. To say, it's symbolic. Right? It's not meant to identify a person, but just to say, right, 666 is below 777, and so it's imperfect. Right? If 777 is perfect.
Jokingly, my wife says that about me all the time because my last four and 668.
Yeah.
So in my name, all three of my names, first, middle, and last, are 6 numbers each.
I think it's time for us to go.
You just said
Yeah. So one option is that kind of symbolic. It's not something specific, but just kind of symbolic of imperfection, of the power that sets itself up against Christ, or perhaps a coming world ruler, but not somebody specific. The third option is that of gematria. Yeah. What is gematria? Well, gematria is an ancient practice that still is around sometimes, but we don't think about it, and we don't call it gematria, where the letters of a person's name have numerical value. So if we think of like A equals 1, B equals 2, C equals 3, etc. Now, ancient gematria was a common practice where people would take the symbols or the letters of a name, convert them to numerical value, and then add them up. In antiquity, though, they didn't have numbers, so they had to use letters for numbers. And Arabic numerals are something we got through Islam and through Muslims. So you use the letters. So it would be 1 through 9. Right? So A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I. But when you got to J, J would be 10. K would be 20, L would be 30, right, up to 90, and then the next one would be 100, 200, 300, 400, right? And so think of Roman numerals, right, that M equals 1,000, C equals, right, so it's that kind of thing. And so, you'd have your numbers up through 9, then 10 through 90, 100 through whatever. And so by putting those letters together, you could use it as a number. And we have indications of gematria taking place. There is some graffiti in Pompeii that was discovered that says, "I love her whose number is 545." Right? And so the letters of this particular woman, if you added them all together, would add up to 545. There's another verse that kind of this antagonism of Nero, and says something like, "Nero, Orestes, Alcmaeon, their mother slew, a calculation knew, Nero his mother slew. Well, if you take the letters for Nero in Greek and the letters for his mother slew in Greek, they both add up to 1,005. Right? And so it's kind of making fun of Nero using this phrase. And Nero actually did have his mother killed. So this practice of gematria, and so people suggested that's what is going on here, that there is a name that John has, and he's converted it, or God has told him to convert it, into a numerical form. And so 666 is the number of a particular person. So which of these seems to be, which of these is accurate? Well, a couple of things that seem like it to me. The symbolic view, we can understand how that could be useful, right? 666 as the incompleteness or the height of imperfection. But the emphasis here is on wisdom and calculate. And so it kind of seems like that his readers were to, understand specifically something about this number. That it's not just a symbolic number, they're supposed to calculate something. Which also means the duration view doesn't fit. So what seems most likely to me is that it's gematria. Now certainly if you're going to go to commentaries of Revelation, you're going to find people all over the board here. And one person will say, well, it's obviously gematria, and here's who it is. And somebody else will say, well, no, it's obvious that it's, right, but where I fall down is gematria seems to be most likely because of the emphasis on wisdom and the call to calculate. But it's easy to go from a name to a number. But going backwards is difficult because a bunch of different things could add up to 666. And so this too has yielded all sorts of speculations. Evidently, Hitler, right, Adolf Hitler, can add up to 666. A lot of people that didn't particularly like President Reagan noted that he had 6 letters in each of his names, Ronald Wilson Reagan. Right? A lot of people have tried to say that about President Obama, right? And so one group says Reagan, the other says about Obama. I don't think either of those is right. And some scholars have pointed out that nearly anybody could add up to 666 if it's done in the right way. You add a title, you change the language, right? And you're like, oh, well, if you put it in Swahili and add it all up, it's 666. Well, why would John's audience put it in? If you put it in Algonquin, it's like you can, there's all sorts of things, and if you turn it around right, it'll add up to 666. If you say, well, if you alternate the spelling, you drop out a letter or you add a letter, it'll add up to 666. Okay, that's true, but that doesn't change the fact that he says wisdom and calculate. What it does mean is it's very difficult to figure out. On the other hand, it needs to make sense to that first audience. So Reagan or Hitler, this calls for wisdom, first century Christians. Calculate the number of the beast. It is 666 and it's Reagan. What? It's got to make sense to them. So the best option that I've seen, and again, I'm not absolutely strict on this, but the one that says, okay, that seems to make some very good sense. I'm not 100% positive on it, but it makes some good sense, is Nero. And particularly, taking Nero and the phrase Neron Caesar in Hebrew, which would look something like this. Right? And so the name Nero Caesar in Hebrew, and then if you break that down into its letters, right? Nun is 50, Resh is 200, Vav is 6, the end Nun is also 50, Kof is 100, Samet is 60, and Resh is also 200. I think you add them all up, 666. But you can also spell Nero Caesar without that last Nun, and if you subtract 50 off of 666, 616. All right. Again, not 100% sure on it. I'm not saying it's absolutely. There's not going to be a question on it. Now, I would want you to say, like I might say, like what are the options, right? And so gematria, chronology, symbolic, right? But this seems to make some good sense to me. That it would have been something that they would have thought about. You say, wait a second. This is a Greek-speaking audience. Why are they using Hebrew? It's a good point. But it's a Greek-speaking audience that John has been giving a lot of Old Testament allusions to. What was the Old Testament written in? Hebrew. Right? And so Hebrew's not completely out of the ballgame here. Even though, like I said earlier, right, you put it into a different language, it makes it say something. That's one of the things that I'm thinking about. There are a couple other things that I want to talk about related to this to finish up on Thursday. But that's kind of where I think, I don't think it's specifically referring to Nero. I think it's using Nero in a symbolic way. And we'll talk more about that on Thursday.